I'm Pastor Kelvin Page, pastor of the Westmore Church of God in Cleveland, Tennessee, and I'm delighted to have the honor to share with you on behalf of Dominion Leadership and just share some thoughts with you about some things that have to do with customizing your ministry to fit your church. I believe every church, just like a human being, has a DNA. And I think one of the most difficult questions we ask ourselves whenever, as a pastor, we are transitioning into another church, or perhaps you are even just going to a church for the first time, that ultimate question is always there, and sometimes it can be haunting. Will I fit? Will I really fit this church? And I think most of us who are pastors have most likely observed pastors going into churches, and after a year, 2 years, 3 years, it becomes obvious that it's just not a good fit. And I think because we've observed that many times, or perhaps we've even gone through it ourselves, it then causes us to step back and ask the question before accepting an invitation to come and pastor somewhere, will I really fit? Now, I think there's reasons as to why pastoral appointments just don't work out. I think sometimes there are churches that just have a very difficult group of people to work with. And many times it doesn't matter who comes to that church, it's just going to be difficult. There may be power struggles, there may be all kinds of issues that go deep into the church, and there's relational division, and so whoever comes to pastor, they're just waiting to see which side he's going to choose, and as a result, it just doesn't work out. I think there's many reasons as to why it just may not work out, but I think there's a big reason that I want to talk to you about today. And that is, some pastorates do not work out because they never took the time to consider what ministries will really fit in this congregation. They never took the time to figure out what the DNA of the congregation really was. And so I would like to submit to you that there are ways to go about finding what that DNA is. Let me just say, in Revelation chapter 1 and 2, you will find 7 churches that are listed there, and it appears to me each one of those churches had a different DNA. In fact, it's also obvious that Jesus, who gave them different commendations as well as different rebukes, he himself had different things to say to each church that were radically different and would indicate that there was a whole different DNA and a purpose for each one existing. And if that's the case, could we be so far off to suggest that churches have different reasons for existing? That churches have a different DNA? Let me say it more practically. Churches could have different personalities, different reasons for existing, different ways of doing things, a different gift mix, perhaps different stories, different cultures. As a pastor, if I'm going to accept a new pastorate, I want to know what the DNA of that church really is, so that I can customize ministry to fit the church. And to do that, there has to be a process that is entered into. And for me, all of that starts with the question, why are we here? Who are we? Where are we going? What has God been saying to us? What is God saying to us in the present? And these are questions that must be asked of a congregation on a personal level. And many congregations are not going to have any idea, so you have to take them through a process to help them figure out the answers to those questions. I want to share with you that this is critically important. It's critically important because if you go to the latest church growth seminar and you start picking up all of the latest trends and you're hearing the leadership gurus of the time, and you end up designing ministry to fit a bunch of ideas that have come outside the context of that local church, you may shortly end up in a situation where you discover it's just not going to fit. I think that's one of the greatest mistakes pastors make. I think they'll go to a seminar, they'll go to denominational seminars, they'll go try to pattern their church after somebody else's, and they'll build in the same systems, and they'll attempt to do it the exact same way. And as a result, it just doesn't work. Now, don't get me wrong. I go to church growth seminars and I go hear leadership gurus, and I think there's some benefit to that, because even if I pick up one idea that fits my church, then it's probably worth my attending and worth my while going. But to go adopt a model or to go take the strategies of somebody else and seek to implement them on your church could be a fatal mistake, and it won't take long for you to figure out that you've made a big mistake, because it just doesn't fit and it just doesn't work. So in the sessions to follow, I want to break down how you can customize your ministry to fit your church. That you need to be very strategic in the ministry structures and the ministry systems and the ministry ideas that you put forth, and how you'll go about working with that local congregation that God's called you to serve. I will say this before we do that. I have pastored 4 different congregations. I've got 30 years of pastoral experience. I hope I'm not too old, but that's a fact. 30-some years of pastoral experience. And I can honestly say I've not pastored one of those 4 churches the same way. I pastored them very differently because of the very thing I'm talking about. The church that I pastor now, the Westmore Church of God, I pastor radically different than I did the last pastorate outside of Raleigh, Durham, a place called Princeton. And I pastored that place radically different than I did Denver, Colorado. Why? Because I sought to build ministry to fit the DNA of the congregation. And remember this, Pastor, it's a lot easier for you to change than to ask a whole entire congregation to change. You need to meet the people where they're at and design ministry to fit them.